Hello, welcome to the August 14th meeting of the Portland, Maine Board of Education Finance, Operations, and Personnel Committee. I'm Sarah BerryDunn. I am the District 5 School Board representative, and I am the chair of this committee. And so we are going to have a wonderful conversation today. Right now in attendance, we have myself, we have board member and committee member Emily Figdor. Joining us shortly will be board member and committee member Julianne Opperman. Some other folks might be joining as well along the way. We'll see what happens. And we also have Superintendent Dr. Ryan Scallon. And we also will probably have more staff as we roll through the meeting as well. Before we get into our agenda, I want to open up the floor for public comment if anybody has any. So if we have any attendees who have joined and would like to give public comment, you can raise your Zoom hand and we will do the work of getting you over so you can speak for 3 minutes. And I'm seeing that we do not have anybody with a Zoom hand up. So I'm going to close public comment and we will move along. I also wanted to quickly apologize for starting the meeting a few minutes late. I have 4:37 right now, so I apologize for not being punctual. We have a number of agenda items today and areas to discuss. I did want to highlight that in the last committee meeting, we had talked about superintendent evaluation procedures and design as a topic that we would revisit in this meeting, and we're not going to do that today. We have a full agenda. So we are going to be talking about a number of budget topics, hiring, ADP, lots of good stuff. And Superintendent Scallon, if you're ready, I will turn it over to you to get started. Is that okay? Or you are muted.
Of course I am. There we go. Afternoon. Why don't I start with a couple of updates on work that's happened before we dig into a couple of follow-up items from the last meeting. So the first piece I want to share is an update around our transition to ADP. So originally ADP was scheduled to be our new payroll process, and it was supposed to kick off in late September. In meeting with our finance team, our project manager, as well as individuals from ADP, and in having a conversation with some of our union partners, it was clear that we were not on track to be able to pull that off in a way that would ensure that it was successful, right? So a large part of this is about making sure that we have the right data in ADP and that we have accurate information. Otherwise, the system won't be effective. And there's a fair amount of cleanup and work to do with the data as we transition from our current system to there. And so we are working with all of our partners on this to push that so that we will now transition to the new payroll system January 1st. There's actually some advantages to doing that, including the fact that we end up being able to provide employees with one single W-2 from one system and then make the transition. It also keeps it so that we're transitioning just 1 year of data looking forward instead of also looking back. And so there's some advantages to it, but we are making that move to transition to ADP January 1st. That was communicated across the district as well, so staff are aware and will be reminded when they return if they are summer or if they're school district only or school year only employees, and so we'll remind them. So that has happened. The second update. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, is it okay to interrupt with questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, super. Well, first of all, I also want to acknowledge that board member Opperman has joined us. Thank you so much. Hello. And so I have 2 questions. The first of which is, what is our confidence level on hitting the January 1 timeframe? And to the extent that there are challenges or hurdles that might prevent, the team from being able to do that, what are we doing to mitigate those? Yeah,
so I don't think I'm yet at a to say that I'm 100% confident. I was going to introduce, and I was just waiting for one of our staff to join, but we are going to introduce a new executive director of finance that will be instrumental in this work. That individual started on Friday, and so is just now getting up to speed on this work. And so I say that all to say, I'd love to wait until they get to do the full assessment to know what that is. Part of what we are doing is we're aiming for a January 1 launch. We are keeping the month of December clear and using that as an opportunity to have sort of a quiet period. So to make sure everything's in order, the system's running effectively, and then launch it. And so the hope is that provides some buffer for any sort of risk. We're also meeting with ADP and our project manager this Friday to review an updated project plan. And part of the question there is, what are the risks and what do we need to factor in? Part of it's just capacity on the team. But so I don't know exactly yet, but my hope is that is a conversation that we are having in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And then to the extent, so that was a two-part question. My other question is, to the extent that September 5th was being held as a day for staff to learn, to do the ALICE training and the school safety, but then also to do the, start to lay the foundation for here's what you need to do payroll-wise. Is the content of that training going to be different than the team had thought? What is that going to look like given this shift?
You mean, it's interesting. I had never actually thought that there was a ton of time on the 5th spent towards it. That was probably just me not being aware.
I may have misunderstood as well.
Oh, no, you're probably right. And so, I mean, my understanding from the initial ALICE and safety training that we did with leaders is it's just going to take more time. Yeah. And so I think they would probably actually appreciate having the additional flexibility the day before students start on the 5th.
Okay, super. Also want to acknowledge that Board Chair Lentz has joined. Thank you so much. Hello. So at the risk of further derailing your progress moving forward, everything you want to say, Dr. Scanlon, any other questions before we move on? Okay, go ahead.
So the second piece that I wanted to just follow up with you and let you know is that BerryDunn did submit to us a work plan for their support. Remember that they're sort of providing 3 levels of support. So one is they are preparing for the audit and supporting our work to make sure that we are ready for that audit, which is the first week of December. The second is that they're providing capacity to help get the work done. And the third is that they're helping make sure that our systems are robust enough that when they leave us, they're effective. And so they did share a work plan that has all of the audit prep and each of the areas reviewed, minus the areas that are in partnership with the city by mid-November. And so the good news is we should be able to work through most of the areas by mid-November. That doesn't necessarily mean we're fully caught up, but it means that we'll have a really good working plan and we'll be pretty far along in each of those areas. The only caveat there around the city is that they just need to do more learning about what the work looks like when it is the finance team. When the finance team from the district is working with the city and who owns reconciling pieces, who owns the journal entries, that type of thing. And so we're meeting with this city on Thursday to go through those pieces. Go ahead, Emily.
My sense is there hasn't been a lot of clarity on divvying up the work with the city, and it's happened, over many years, and it's happened. It hasn't happened in necessarily an intentional way. So it seems like this is an opportunity to create some clarity and some more process, and for that to help strengthen our overall work.
I think that makes sense. I mean, this will partially be a learning for me, this is the first time where I've worked in a system where there's such overlap in the systems. And at least in talking with our consultants from BerryDunn, it sounds like there are certain things that fully happen on the district side and some things that happen on the city side and some things that happen in between. And to your point of like getting real clarity and some common understanding around expectations will be helpful. Yeah.
And have that written down.
I mean, yeah, that sounds like a good place to get to. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, I write it down, write everything down. Yes.
Yes.
Big fan of that concept.
So that was the second piece. Any other questions around BerryDunn?
Emily, go ahead.
I just have a question about staffing overall in the finance department. Clearly understand and fully support the work of the need for and work of BerryDunn. And I know we have an updated look at staffing across the district. I haven't dug into that since you sent it on Friday. So my apologies on that, but I'm just wondering where we're at overall in staffing the finance department. I think about half the positions the last I knew were empty.
Yeah, it is not significantly better than that. Give me 1 second. I'll just pull it up.
Sorry, I can also dig into the chart myself.
No, I just pulled it up, so I had it in front of me. I think you're exactly right on the 50% count. So one of Helene DiBartolomeo joined us on Friday as the new executive director of finance, and I'll do a formal introduction of her in a second. But she was with us on Friday and then all day Saturday. And one of the last things she did on Saturday was to ask for 3 positions to ensure that they're posted, specifically to prioritize the staffing of them. One was a payroll specialist, one was staff accountant, and the third was for purchasing. And it was for exactly what you just said. I mean, I'm a firm believer that BerryDunn is helpful in the short term because otherwise there was no capacity. We have to get out of the business of contracting out what are key functions. I mean, one of the issues around why we're behind on ADP is that most of the folks that are the primary workers for that transition actually aren't full-time Portland Public School staff. And so even that institutional knowledge that we need to have as we make that transition isn't here. And so it is a priority. And so we listed those 3 positions. We did hold on 2 other positions that were budgeted. And that's the controller and the director of budget. And the reason we held on that is simply Helene wants to do a little bit more thinking about what's the right structure for that office. And so it was not a statement either way about that, but just wanted to get a little more thinking about what she was looking for and what builds on her strengths and serves as a complement. And so there will be more. They're all budgeted positions. And so there's no financial increase to what we're talking about. But we do need to work our way out of BerryDunn because that is a cost.
Yeah, and it makes a ton of sense to prioritize the 3 positions you mentioned and to figure out structurally where she wants to take things. So I can appreciate that and in the prioritizing. So that sounds good.
Cool. So then let me just, because I keep talking about these folks and doing a poor job introducing them, let me just share. We're going to share at the board meeting tomorrow, but for this committee, because it impacts 2 of the direct contacts. So Helene DiBartolomeo is coming on as the executive director of finance. Thank you to many of you on this call because you helped interview and select. We were fortunate to have some candidates that would have been really strong. And Helene really rose to the top because of her experience both in Maine, as most recently or currently the director of finance for Cumberland, and formerly the chief financial officer for a district in Florida. And that district, when she was in Florida, which was a handful of years ago, at that time had a budget of $250 million. And so a pretty big district. I think about 2.5 to 3 times the size of Portland Public Schools. And so it's coming with a wealth of experience, both in terms of how school district finance works, as well as how Maine finance works. And as I said, like jumped right in and has started the work. And so she won't be able to be at the board meeting tomorrow, but when she's able to join, because she is finishing up her work in Cumberland, she will join. The other individual that is trying to get on and is having a little bit of technical difficulties is Sarah Warren. Dr. Warren is coming to us from Baltimore Public Schools and will serve as the executive director of operations. And again, I feel really fortunate that we had several candidates that would have been successful in this role. And Sarah is coming to us with this great combination of having led complex work in bigger districts and that focus on the whole child. Right now, she leads the whole child initiative in Baltimore. And so I think she will bring a lot to the team of both how do we organize our systems so that they're predictable and effective, but also how do we make sure that they're serving our families and our students and being really thoughtful about that, right? Like our first experience that many students have before they get to school is the bus ride, and then it's their food. And so how are we thoughtful about what those experiences do to set up students to be successful throughout the rest of the day? And so Sarah started with us today. And so she is here. I mean, we've been fortunate. These folks are ready to jump in and dive in and do the work. And so she is full-time starting today. Those were the sort of potpourri of updates that I knew we had. We also had 3 pieces, and Chair Bryden, tell me how you want to do this. We had 3 pieces of follow-up from our last meeting. One was a question around getting more of an understanding of the budget and where you can see investments. The second was around starting to talk about the timeline for the FY25 budget. And the third was this idea of seeking feedback from the community in a survey, among other things that we're doing. And so those were sort of the 3 topics. Mm-hmm. Do you have a preference on where we start or how you want to do this?
I think that the order that you listed them in makes sense to me.
All right, so I'm going to pull up on my screen something just to orient. And since this is our first time doing this together, part of what I would love to have is feedback from members of the committee on what's helpful and what you would like to see so that we can make sure that we're providing that.
We can do that.
Perfect. I always appreciate that. Just as orientation, if you remember, last year, you, as a board, and then the city, and then the voters approved a budget that was around $143 million.
Yes. I'm so sorry. Are you intending to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm going to in a second.
Oh, okay.
I didn't want to get lost in the details for a second. Yeah. So you approved a budget for $143 million. What I'm going to show you is a budget that includes some additional funding that we receive in some cases every year. In some cases, it's COVID funds, and so it ends. And so you'll see a slightly higher number. Sorry, hold on a second. It's asking for my permission. Oh. Little technical difficulties here. It's asking me to jump off and jump back on to show you my screen. The joys of a computer update, it looks like. Let's I'm gonna try this real quick without that and then see, but I may be disconnected and back on.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. I'm good. All right. All right. Can you see that?
The Excel spreadsheet, yes.
So
The font is very small, but you can see it.
very small. Let's make it bigger. Is that better?
Yep.
All right, great. So I wanted to provide just like a couple of things and then share it so that you can play with it further. What you can see here is that there's two sets of tables. The top table shows you funding based on state funding codes. So O1 is regular instruction, so how much we're spending on regular instruction, special education, CTE, and so on. And so you can read that down. And then going across is first the district totals, and then by school. And with the central office department at the end. Just a caveat on the central office department is that that includes everything, including food services, transportation. It includes positions that right now have been staffed that sit centrally, but then will be deployed. And so it will change. And some of those funds will go towards schools, but some of them are also towards the operations of schools. So that's what you see on the top. On the bottom, you see it based on funding streams. So you see the local funds approved there and the council approved. Local grants is smaller local grants that happen here. The state grants are for the most part around adult ed. We can look at those. Federal grants are your Title I, Title II, 3, 4, as well as ESSER. And then CDS is payments we get back for our pre-K program. So that's what you see here. And then if you look across the bottom, you can see overall enrollment and approximate per pupil spending. I will just add one other piece that this is very much a draft and work in progress, as some of the funding around the federal grants continues to get shifted and finalized.
Board Member Figueroa, go ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Scanlon, thanks for emailing this directly to the committee members. I appreciate that. Or the board more generally. I'm not sure who you sent it to. But it is, I don't know, at least for me, I opened it, but then the formulas weren't able to work to populate the different cells. So I saw just the totals, but none of the additional details. So even if there's a way to take a snapshot of it and resend it, not urgently, but that would be helpful to me at least.
Yeah. And Board Member Figueroa, if it's helpful, we can definitely do screenshots or PDFs of all of the pieces. If it's also the case that as you look at those and there are questions, because part of this is always a question of what's the right cut and what's the right way to look at it. I'm happy to provide that in other ways.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that, yes, so I had the same experience of, not being able to get in, but Board Member Opperman, I see you, and I'll go to you after I ask this next question. Dr. Scanlon, I'm curious about whether when you look at this data, if there's any, this might be too early to be able to answer this, but if you have any initial gut reactions or things you're surprised about or things that, when you sort of look at this data, is there anything that jumps out at you where you are like, okay, well, I need to look at this more closely, or I wonder what's going on there? And did anything like that strike you? So
nothing that struck me like that on the overall dollar amount or FTE, right? Mm-hmm. There was nothing that struck me there. No. What actually struck me was how difficult it was to actually get the information. And so that for me was a aha, and one of the focuses for the new executive director of finance's work is actually to get this at our fingertips. Because even the stuff where we're looking at FTEs, there's a lot that changes in schools right now, right? So FTEs are always messy. Staffing, full-time equivalent staff are always messy during the summer as people transition in, transition out, et cetera. But the numbers we're still looking at, and we're going to look at here, are from spring. And so, no, I would say that the biggest thing that struck me is around just how much work we have to do to make it so that we're really using this information as effectively as we could.
And it sounds like what we're looking at here is the result of a fair amount of work to just gather the data. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So please tell the team how much we appreciate all that hard work. Really, really appreciative of that. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Yes, I really thank you for this. Knowing how things are and where they are is critical for us to think about things. My question had to do with out of district tuitions other than special ed tuitions. I know we have some students that go to Long Island that we pay tuition for. I don't know if we have some in other locations. And I wondered where, how they might be included somewhere. And I also wanted to know if we have anyone coming in to district paying tuition. Those are the two pieces that seem to elude me. And I don't think it's on this, but it might be something for future information, unless you know exactly what I mean.
So there's a couple of spots. So it's not certainly on this high level. And I didn't look at revenue really that end, minus knowing what funds were approved. So I looked at the budget approval, but not the revenue piece. That's something we can look at and get you that information. There are, if you dig into each of the school tabs, you will see a spot for tuition. I did not dig in enough to know whether that was for special education or for other tuition examples like you gave. That's something we can certainly look into, provide you. When the formulas start to update for you, and you can't see this, but part of the reason that the Zoom wouldn't work is because I had to switch computers because it kept freezing my computer, is if you look at district totals, you can start to see at a high level, and you can see this for each of the schools. And so I have a little bit hidden here, but on the top, you can again see those district breakdowns by funding areas and by budget areas. You can see total FTE based on spring as well as the grants. And then if you wanted to dig in, you could start to see that in regular instruction, which we don't actually code a lot of people to, you can start to see where the FTEs are broken down. And so what you'll see, and why this was partially sort of like an exercise for the team, is there are sometimes lines that are used multiple times, right? So under administrator, you can see both their salary, their benefits, their anthem, their Social Security, Medicare, as well as retirement. And then we use that same set of coding a second time. There's some reasons for that, but basically what they did is they combed through, and what we should really just show you is something that hides that. And you can start to get at a high level a sense of what our administrator salaries and benefits here, both in council approved, local, et cetera. And so you can start to see, to Board Member Opperman's question about where are the investments and where do titles and ESSER funds play out, you can start to see where we've spent federal grants and where we spent state grants and where we spent local grants. And so you can start to see that here. And you can see that by each of the schools as well along the bottom. And so again, just digging in, you can start to play around with this for East End, Row, et cetera, to start to get a sense. of what our starting spot is. And for me, this was all about just making sure we are starting to have, as we go into budget season, knowledge of where the starting spot was, so that we're better able to then have the conversations around what next year looks like. And so at the bottom, you can see all the schools, and then you have the central office there as well. And if you're wondering what goes into local grants, state grants, federal grants, if you go over here, you can see what's in them.
Mm-hmm. Super. Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
Dr. Scanlon, I might have said this to you before, but as I think you know, in recent years, we've made a lot of progress systematizing FTEs.
Yep.
The place where, when I have dug into the budget, when I dig into the budget, where I think there's how we deploy resources is unclear and potentially less systematic, is around special ed. I know, we're short-staffed and we have a lot of work to do ahead of us on the budget, but just flagging that, again, like not as a, adding a to-do list, to-do item for you, but just potentially an area of opportunity. Not this past budget, but the previous budget, I really tried to dig into some of the special ed budget numbers and was left not, feeling like we had some work to do in that area. Again, like we got to pick our battles to some extent as we're facing this budget. So just more raising it as a point of information.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. When I started with the formulas, I actually had a hard time getting to the end FTE. I think because of what you just shared, and because there's some additional funds where it's not impacted by the formula, like ESSER funds, like the other titles. And I think folks have tried really hard to be responsive to need. But that's where I think you get some variability and you lose a little bit on the formula-based piece, which is why for me, I think it's important, and it'll make it more complex, don't get me wrong, but I think it's important that as we go through this next budget season, we do it together where we have all of the funding streams up, because there's actually some grants that I couldn't even capture yet, but that we look at it all together so that some of those decisions around how we staff, we're able to balance out there.
Board Chair Lentz, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I just think that this is just incredibly helpful and just like answers a ton of questions. And I think will give us a really great foundation, as you said, Superintendent Scout moving into the budget season to actually understand where resources are going. I think on the formula pieces, I think if there is time within a future meeting to actually go over those, that's something that I hear from the public all the time, that they have a lot of questions about, both the equity formula and the special ed formula, and just like in general. I know that that's in the weeds, but I think that level of information could be really helpful at the board level. And then would you mind just zooming in on your screen a little bit, since we can't access this? It will just help me get a little bit more information because I got some old eyes today. Thank you.
Yeah.
You can also at the top, sorry to jump in, but at the top of your Zoom screen, under view options, you can increase the size. And that is very helpful for the spreadsheet.
Yeah, and we'll also change it to values and share it with you. So we'll probably give it back to you as an Excel. But there's just a lot of formulas going on in the background, which are overwhelming. So we'll send it to you as well.
Thank
That's
you.
why to play.
Yep, Thank you. Any other questions before we continue? Okay, good to go.
So, and can I just, as one final thought on this, is just offer up that as you start to dig in this, I'm very much digging into it as well. And so if it's helpful to have a conversation around questions that you're wondering or other cuts of the data, please let Helene and I know. If it's helpful to get it in another format, like let's make this as useful as possible so that we can help with that.
Thank you. Is that, so what you just shared, is that the extent of the first of the three topics that you,
Yes.
Okay, yep, super. So now we're moving on to timeline, which I think actually is a great, now we have this discussion of, where we have been spending our money, and now we're going to be looking to the future and timeline and all that. It sounds like we're ready to move to that second topic. Yes.
Yep. So this is where I really am looking for feedback from members of the committee based on your experience in past budget seasons. What we tried to do is, myself and the team, is we tried to match up what is the strategic planning process with the budget process so that conversations were aligned, it could happen together. And so what I have here, and I'll extend it, is like it almost can fit sort of the whole budget season and what are some proposed topics for our next several finance committee meetings. And if we find that we want to add or change, I'm completely open, but wanted to get a starting spot that worked backwards from a referendum back to our next committee meeting. And so the proposal would be that we'd actually use our next committee meeting to finalize the roadmap and to make sure that all the questions around FY24, you feel like you have the information, so we're in a starting spot. That we'd use the committee meeting after that to really sort of nail down and then share with the larger board the draft guardrails and goals, with the idea that the goals may adjust slightly in the strategic plan, but the buckets won't. That we would use a November finance committee for public listening and getting feedback on the budget, et cetera. And so you can sort of see how it aligns there.
Yeah, I was just, so from my experience, having gone through this one time, I will say the bottom of the page, the March, April timeframe, from my one round of experience with this, is going to need a lot of collaboration with the city folks.
Yeah.
But like draft wise, yes, absolutely. But in terms of getting all that scheduling nailed down, there's a lot of moving parts. And it's not just the committee, not just the board, but also the city folks that need to be involved in that. Board Chair Lentz, I see your hand is up, so I will move on to you.
Just one piece of feedback that we got last year on this document was to have it blatantly obvious where public comment would be available. And I think it's kind of obvious here, but I think if we could have like a whole column that made it easier for people to know, that would be awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Like a little microphone or something, an icon. No, but I really thank you very much for putting in the effort to put this together. I like the overall, like the I assume intent and the idea around mapping out not just when the meetings are happening, but like the strategy of here's what we're going to talk about when, and here's how we're going to get to where we want to go. And so sort of that concept of the budget process combined with the strategic planning process, I appreciate the approach that you took to this. Thank you. Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
I just encourage us to have actual public meetings with our colleagues on the city side. So not behind the door, not behind closed door meetings, but public meetings where that are accessible to all, to have to work collaboratively. So the city is fully understanding the situation we're in and some of our decision making along the way, and that we have their input. Not just when after we have the superintendent's budget, but throughout the process.
Absolutely. And just so that everybody in this, conversation and anybody watching the meeting recording in the future is aware, I did extend an invitation to the City Council Finance Committee to join this meeting to sort of, stay updated and, as you're talking about, Emily, to allow us to have as collaborative a process as possible and start that now. Sadly, they have a city council meeting double session that conflicts with our meeting time. So,
my experience is that they don't join our meetings, but we can join theirs, or we could schedule a joint meeting. But I've never seen a city councilor join one of our finance committee meetings. That was just,
sure. And I think that it may have happened today if who knows, but were it not for the fact that they have a city council meeting occurring right now. So, so we'll continue to extend invitations and.
I think I'm suggesting an alternative path. First of all, they always meet on Mondays, right? So this is not just 1 week where we're having a conflict.
For sure.
My suggestion would be to, in the fall, to have some scheduled times for joint meetings, or where we actually get on their finance committee calendar to talk collaboratively.
For sure, that's also that is another thing to explore in the future. And I also, so in terms of the Monday conflict, I absolutely hear what you're saying. I think, and Ryan, you might be headed in this direction anyway, so apologies if I'm getting ahead, but when we move to a different cadence of meetings of this committee, we might find that, so we keep the Monday meetings that we have on the books and then add in another meeting, and that might not be on Mondays. So, Dr. Scallon, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I made note. I mean, I think that where we can get feedback and have everybody know the challenges that are likely going to exist in the budget, the more successful we'll all be. To the point you were just bringing up, Ms. Bryden, I can't decide what I'm going with here on board member, chair, et cetera. But in terms of what you just shared, just for everybody's sake, I appreciated your question around changing the cadence. And I do think that as we get further into this work, we will need to have more frequent touch points because of the amount of work and decisions that are going to be made. I did ask that we wait to increase that cadence just until Helene was in and had the chance to get up to speed, because there's a lot of work that goes into the prep of the meeting. And so it made sense for her to be fully settled before that happened. So I would anticipate after that October 9th meeting that we could start to talk about a different cadence.
Super. And just to commiserate, I am sitting here going, do I call you Ryan or superintendent or doctor? And so, yes, it's all messy. Board member Figter, go ahead.
Yeah, one last thing is I'd love to see on this timeline, also a meeting with our state legislative delegation. Typically, we've started those conversations in the fall, pretty early in the fall, as they're starting to prep for their filing of bills, which is, Dr. Scallon, which is typically pretty early in December. So they understand, in particular this year, understand the challenges we face and may be able to consider legislative options to help us.
Super, thank you.
Yeah, you have me thinking that this is probably a little too much of an internal meeting piece, and there's obviously some additional members to engage. So, yeah, we can make that adjustment so we have like the full plan there.
I think it has absolutely, prompted and brought forward a lot of really good conversations, which is half of the reason for doing draft documents anyway. So thank you for that.
Any other feedback?
I would be, again, if this is too preliminary, by all means say so, but I'd be curious to get a little bit more of your thoughts, Dr. Scallon, on how you envision the combination of strategic planning and budget.
Yeah.
The planning, can you talk a little bit more about how you're seeing those things in tandem or parallel or?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, there'd be a little bit more time to fully sequence it, right? Where we could go through the full strategic planning process and then be able to engage in the budget and making sure that the budget's aligned. I think the reality is that we can't fully sequence it that way this year. And so we've been working with our partner at Attune to really think about the strategic planning process and the engagement. And so I'm just going to switch documents here for a second, just to show you what that looks like. Again, this is draft, but it'll give you a sense of sort of how we're trying to match up things. And so as you look through this, you'll see three different types of committees. You sort of see an executive committee. That's the group that's really responsible for some of the writing and creation. You see a steering committee, which is really a crosshold of stakeholders. And then you see subcommittees and focus groups. And so the way we sort of designed it was to, if you think about the budget and getting the budget feedback and the process, is it sort of matches up timeline. So we were talking on that previous calendar about thinking about the guardrails and the goals in October, and we align it here. And so we're trying to get some of that work to align so that it informs both the strategic plan as well as the budget at the same time. We talked about getting feedback in around November, which is the same time we're looking at getting feedback or December around budget and the priorities within the strategic plan from specific focus groups. And so we're trying to get it so that it aligns and it sort of goes some of the strategic planning work or some of the identification of key priorities, and then the budget aligned to it is sort of how we've been approaching it. And so we're trying to get, and what we'd ideally do is combine these two work streams and just make it into one plan. But we decided to make two documents on it to make it a little bit more complex. We're trying to get them to exactly harmonize together. And so the key thing here is that the strategic plan won't actually get done until March, which is very deep into budget season. But actually a lot of the work at that point is more about cleaning up what are the measures, how are we going to measure, how are we going to track that, than it is about identifying the priorities, where the priorities and some of the key work streams will be what really impacts funding, not funding, but expenses.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from folks? Board Member Fichter, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Scallon, I'm wondering who you're envisioning will be on the executive committee versus the steering committee.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting. So the names changed a little bit in the draft in the document to make them sound sort of like more almighty than they probably should. So I think of the executive committee as being a subset of key leaders in the district that are really like putting pen to paper. The steering committee is the group that's truly the cross-section of stakeholders within the city that are helping us make sure that we're identifying the right priorities and that we have some of the key actions identified underneath them. So there you would see a member of the board, you'd see parents, you'd see a student, you'd see a school leader, you'd see teachers, you'd see some nonprofit leaders. And then the subcommittees are where you would say, all right, here's one of the priorities we're going to go really deep on. Our strategy around multilingual learners, our strategy around safe and equitable schools. And a member of the steering committee would chair a subcommittee around that would do some of the work in between the different steering committee meetings. And so the idea is that there's sort of 3 levels to it. The sort of like full-time staff that are like pen to paper and responsible for like getting it down. Steering committee, which is really about generating the ideas and helping to prioritize. And then subcommittee, which is about really making sure that the underlying tasks are really strong and aligned to what is needed in Portland.
And how will we do recruitment for the steering committee in particular?
I would love feedback on that because that's one of the topics that we've talked about. I got a little bit of feedback about how it was done in the past for like the superintendent search. But I'd love feedback because, I mean, I've done a lot of listen and learning sessions so far, and I have more people that I think would be amazing for this than would make sense. And so I'd be curious on feedback on what you would recommend.
Just from my experience, I think we need to do both broad outreach and then specific outreach. Like people, there are critical parts, members of our community or communities within our district who we need to hear from in this process. But in order to make that happen, we really need to do targeted outreach. And, and that was the case in the superintendent search process, for sure. And even still, we didn't have I don't think we had the full representation that we needed to. And I think we made some mistakes in the composition of that team ultimately, that we could have putting some more thought into what it should look like ahead of time would have, it was the participants were amazing, but there were some limitations in who was represented. And I think that, so I think the outreach should be very wide. So we're asking a lot of people, and there's some very accessible process, that is, enabling people to raise their hand to say that they're interested and why, but then we're making that accessible so all sorts of different people can participate. And then that we're doing direct outreach to people who are engaged and we know we need to hear their voice or they represent different parts of our community, etc.
I think those are good points. I have a follow-up question. I'm curious, and I know that we're going to be moving to feedback from the community and survey questions in a little bit, so I'm setting that aside a little bit, but wanted to get Dr. Scallon, your thoughts on your vision for, so there's the steering committee with subcommittees. What are the mechanisms, if any, other than serving on a committee that members of the community will be able to provide, and other than the survey, like, will there be like a portal or a mailbox or something where folks can contribute their ideas during the process that is not one of the things we've already described?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can come up with some processes that result in some robust feedback. I will also just name that, well, this work in terms of the drafting, people have been providing feedback for the last month and a half, right? So there's been some, I think, really intentional outreach to the full continuum of Portland Public Schools community members in the Listen and Learn, right? So we've run them for multilingual. We have dinner on Wednesday with teens experiencing homelessness that are also in our schools with Preble Street. We're meeting the business community on Wednesday. And so what I would say is, in terms of the initial baseline of what are some themes, what are trends, and what are some things we could do to improve Portland Public Schools, there's a lot of opportunities that are ongoing even now to provide feedback.
Mm-hmm. And also, to follow up on that, Board Chair Lentz, I have a quick question for you. I'm curious about whether all of the feedback that was gathered by Alma during the superintendent search process, whether we can fold that in, because I'm sure there's a lot of value in there that we can use to inform this process as well.
Yes. And Ryan, did you get that? Yes. So like even before Ryan was actually working, he got that set of data from Alma. And I also just wanted to add that it did feel like having a landing page on the website that was like pretty interactive and had places for people to submit and just the basic information would be a strategy I would suggest. Again, I know we always have like a budget page with the documents and the schedule, but I think it could be built out to be more interactive and a collection point landing page for the community.
Super.
Yep, we can do that. I mean, one of the things that even when we get to the conversation around the survey is we're only going to look at the budget specific questions, and partially because we're working with Attuned again on the survey, and we don't want to repeat questions that we've already asked and had answered. And so between some of the parent surveys that exist, around, I think, TNTP, as well as the superintendent search, is trying to make sure that this is going deeper or adding on to the conversation and not just duplicative in nature, is part of the work of what we're doing. So I think there is a ton of feedback that's already been gathered, and then we'll make sure that there are ways for folks to both engage in person and provide feedback, as well as to comment at least a couple of times as the plan is getting drafted, to help inform it. And part of the challenge and like the charge for folks that are leading subcommittees is to really make sure that their subcommittee of members is really diverse and representative. And so it's going to be about leveraging, Grace Valenzuela and her team to make sure that that subcommittee is really diverse and goes deep. And so, I think it'll be a huge amount of work, don't get me wrong, but I think it's the right engagement to move this forward.
Board Chair Lentz, go ahead.
And just one other thing to just put into this conversation, one of the challenges that we hit within the superintendent search was the amount of time we were asking for. A lot of folks in our multilingual community are, in the tourism industry or in agricultural or food processing, which they just don't have that amount of time to give, especially if it's uncompensated. So if there is money to compensate folks, I would advocate for that, especially if we're going to ask for a lot of time. So just those two things to be thinking about as we move into this.
And I don't have the questions off the top of my head, but I think that part of why we are having the Maine writers be staff is so that when we do bring members of the community together, we can be really thoughtful and intentional about the feedback and about the questions that we're going to discuss, so that we can maximize the time and not put the production on outside members of our community.
That's great. I have a question about, this might be addressed in the document. I apologize if I'm asking something that's already there, but I'm hopeful that you can talk a little bit about what the vision is to make sure that the subcommittees are talking to each other. And so it's not silos. And so if there are dependencies or ways to, improve outcomes by partnering across subcommittees, what's your plan for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually part of the work of the steering committee and then the executive, right? Mm-hmm. It's that the steering committee says, let's make sure we have the right priorities in the right buckets, and then let's make sure we understand how to do this work really well. And so let's put together a subcommittee that will go deep on this. And then let's bring it back and look at it as a steering committee and say, is this redundant? Are there dependencies that we need to be really thoughtful of, or does this really build on the other work? And so I think that is actually the work of the steering committee is to identify priorities and then make sure we end up with a coherent plan as we're going through this.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Dr. Scanlon, do you have a sense of the size of the steering committee? Just thinking of all the groups and thinking of the interaction in the community, how big a group can you put together and get something done?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the tension, right? So we've already started to look at how many folks it is. And so I think that's going to be the tension, is what's the right size group that captures all the voices that exist in Portland and is small enough that we can actually get work done, which again is like why we tiered it at 3 levels. But I think the steering committee ends up being pretty big. I did like a back of the napkin sort of count, and I think I was between 20 and 25.
Okay.
And that's really with the idea that there's a representative and that the subcommittees allow us to go deep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have to stay again on the budget breakdown, and the Excel spreadsheet is many, many things. It's something I've wanted for months and now feel I can understand what's going on. So again, thank you on that. And I think the process I'm interested to see how the process works on getting the input on the budget from the teachers and the individual buildings. And then as that goes on into the strategic plan, it's, the people that are on the ground, they're always in my mind.
And just to confirm, just following up on that, so the executive committee, steering committee, subcommittees, that's strategic planning, not just budget, correct? Yeah, super. Okay.
That's actually very specific to strategic plan, but the two can't be separated.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it is specific to that.
Okay.
And then can I, Dr. Opperman, if I can just illuminate a little bit on the staff piece, because I would love your help in encouraging folks, is there's been a number of staff that have joined us for listen and learn sessions, and it's been great to have teachers and leaders and ed techs and all kinds of staff in our conversations, including at LISET last week, an individual who was nominated to be custodian of the year and came in second place, right, was there. And so it's been great to have those perspectives. During the beginning of the school year, we're going to run focus groups at each of the schools as part of that. And so to make the focus groups not be 50, 60 unwieldy, we're going to end up doing them as focus groups so we can really get the feedback. But there'll be other opportunities to just provide feedback either informally or through the survey as well, or still in the listen and learn sessions that are coming up.
Good. Thank you. That takes a lot of energy, but I think from what I've heard, people really appreciate meeting you and others about the same. They're feeling connected, and that's, I think, critically important for moving forward on plans, on budgets, and everything else. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Speaking, our committee chair, Bryden, if it's all right with you, this sort of takes us to like the third topic, which
that's where I was headed as well. Go ahead.
Great.
Yeah.
I am not a survey writer, but so to put this in context, we will do, and it'll launch the first week of school, a district-wide survey that is available at all levels. So from leader to student, community member, parent, et cetera, that will ask for feedback that really does like an organizational diagnostic and a deep dive around where are we going and doing really well as Portland Public Schools, and we should build on it, and where do we need some additional focus and attention. And so it'll be high as well as some focused areas. in a previous meeting, board member Figdor suggested, and I thought it was really smart, to use that as an opportunity to also get feedback around the budget and to in some ways crowdsource both on priorities as well as on some creative solutions for some of the budget challenges we're going to face. And so in working with Attune, there were sort of 4 questions that we had come up with that were specific around the budget. The tension here being that we want to ask just a handful of questions so that we can not have people spend all day on a survey, and increase the likelihood of feedback, and that we got actionable data. And so I'm not a survey writer, so there you can see the 4 questions. The second one would have a list of key priorities that we would identify and share there, and they would rank them. But I would love feedback and support and some thoughts around how we can tune these and make these a little better.
Board Member Victor, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted.
Yeah.
Gonna do it at least once a meeting. I really appreciate this and look forward to the information we'll get back from our staff and community. I think some of the first question, I just want to ensure that when we're asking questions, we do it in language that's as accessible to kind of a full range of people as possible. So I don't think that a lot of people are going to understand what non-negotiables, and maybe this is just like these are just placeholder questions for now. But I don't think that I could necessarily answer this question, nor could I answer it with specificity. So I just worry we're not going to. And then 3, we don't have additional funds. We're going to be cutting. So I rather focus and get people's attention on, do you have creative recommendation on the 4th one? I still think the 4th, the way, again, maybe we have a lot of wordsmithing to do, but I still think the 4th one isn't as straightforward as it could be. But I think that's really where we want to, I like 2 and being able to rank those priorities a lot. I wouldn't ask 3 at all because I think it gives people the sense that we might have places we can invest in when that's not the case. Clearly I understand money can move around, but I don't think we should set that up as something that we're working towards, because it seems very hard for us to follow through on that. So those are just my first reactions to these questions, which I greatly appreciate our doing.
Yeah, I agree on question 3. And I'm curious. So for question 1, I wonder if it's as simple as, that's not a good way to phrase what I'm trying to say. But for example, we could ask a question that is essentially, what do you wish we could spend more money on? Because that gets at priorities, what it gets at, what people think is the most important area of the budget to be preserving and protecting. I also wonder if it makes sense to have a question that's basically number 4, tweaking it a little bit, and question 4 could perhaps be the question that does get at cuts, but is more specific and, presenting 3 or 4 areas that could potentially provide some cost savings, and ask folks to rank those. Would be another way to go. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
I agree on number 3. I think on the first one, the part I really liked about that question is included in all school budgets, because everyone has their pet project perhaps in their school, which may be critically important for that school, but to think about maybe in terms of categorizing student outcomes or other people things, personnel, just the Portland Promise-y type things in categories that people might, so we find out people are thinking, give them reason to think about those ideas and why they might show up elsewhere. Because they'll all have one thing in their head, is my thought, is this is what I think is the most important thing that needs to be done. And maybe there might be other things that they hadn't thought of that they could at least recognize the importance of for all schools. So it's my 2 cents.
Board Chair Lentz, go ahead.
Yeah, just echoing a lot of what people are saying already. And in the surveys that we designed for the superintendent search, we just did that alongside the multilingual team because they were able to tell us very quickly what language was not accessible or translatable, right? Because they're 2 different lanes. I think one thing that I would love us to do, often school communications come as a parent, I get an email with a link in it, and that's it. And there's no like context setting or any other information in that first blurb. And I would love if we could get to a place where there's information in that first, because often people are not going to do the click in and then have that same context within the survey itself at the top, just because I think we just need to take advantage of any points of contact to educate around the budget and what we're facing and try to get people in at the beginning. So those are just a couple other thoughts. And there might be a very good reason that we do the way that we do, and I don't know that reason. And if there is, I would love to know it.
Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
Yeah, just on that, Dr. Scallon. So you know, as a parent, what, or maybe you've already started to experience it as a parent, but like the last communication I got from the district said letter from Superintendent Scallon, right? And you're like, oh wow, letter about what, right? And you know, there are some people who will open anything from the district, like myself, but but everything we know about kind of engaging people who are extremely busy, and running in multiple directions, especially with kids, is that it's really important to give them as much information as possible to entice them and to motivate them to open. But that's not actually what I wanted to say. I wanted to say on the 4th question, I really hope that we do ask an open-ended question about ideas people have for essentially, and maybe, in the wording, it could be around, to ways we could structure public education in Portland differently, or, getting a little bit more at kind of prompting people to think creatively. But I really do hope that we ask an open-ended question so we don't just get our ideas, because that's what I think, like, we'll have opportunities for community feedback. And I think the most important thing for this survey is to hear what, what creative ideas people have.
Yes, I think that is absolutely, I do think that there's the tension in my head right now is that, question 3, like there's no more money, there's no additional funds like we all agree we shouldn't ask that question. I part of my brain is hesitating because I don't want to give folks in the community false hope that, oh, somebody's just gonna have this great idea, we'll come up with this extra pot of money. A lot of this stuff is so complex, and if there were, I do think it makes sense to get people's ideas, but I don't want to frame it as like somebody, is going to answer the survey and, magically everything's fine in terms of the budget. And I know that's not what you were suggesting, but I want to be mindful of setting that, expectation in terms of how it's framed. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you. I think one of the areas that it's very hard for people who do not have students in a particular school, who are alums don't have children, that they have a sense of what's going on in the district. And I know you're reaching out in lots of ways, Dr. Scallon, but there's some of the general publicity type places such as Forecaster and West End and Press Herald, TV stations, radio stations, places that we can let people know that these surveys are happening. I mean, it puts it maybe more people, maybe not more people, but I just, there are people that don't know what's going on at all. And I'd be quite frank, sometimes getting on our district, it's better than it was, but getting on our district website is not necessarily the easiest thing for them to do. They'll end up in Oregon, time. So,
yeah, thank you for that. And it also just made me think of a follow-up question or a related question. So if this is going out as part of the parent survey, is there a mechanism to carve out the questions that are specific to budget and creative ideas and that kind of stuff, but don't have to do with you have a kid in the district, so that other people could provide their opinions as well?
Yeah, and sorry, the survey will be available to everybody.
Okay.
And it has options where folks will select in sort of what role they're filling out the survey.
Okay.
That will then tailor it slightly, but not significantly. I mean, I think the hard thing is the reality is that we know email addresses and telephone numbers for members of our staff and our families.
Sure.
The question will be sort of like, how do we help point folks more to our website to fill it out, and how do we have other ways?
Yeah.
Maybe we can split the neighborhood. But no, in that open ideas on how to do that.
Like, for example, could we send an email to everybody who filled out the form saying, I would like to participate in the superintendent search?
Yeah.
I want to be that. The Foundation for Public Schools, I think, has a list that maybe we could use or something like that. And also, social media and all that.
Yep. Yeah, we can do all that.
Super. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
There is a list on the city site for neighborhood associations. I have 5 in my district, and trying to reach out to them at different times, and that might be another place. They don't always list emails, but they do list addresses, individuals and addresses and I found that useful. I mean, it's generated a meeting with constituents for me. So it might be something that each of us could see in our areas, as board members, reaching out to our communities, because I think that, again, makes the board seem connected to reality a little bit too. So besides,
Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
For our staff, I encourage us to, I hope that we really encourage staff to hear their ideas. I think they're the ones in many instances who are closest to the work and might have some really creative ideas based on their experiences. And then just in general, people probably know, but responses via text message are way higher, through the roof higher compared to email. So using, we should do both as much as we can. It's helpful for people to see the same piece of information multiple times. It's in general, I think, there's a kind of rule of thumb that people need to see something 3 times in order to engage. I think it's a little bit, that's kind of in, more of a kind of community organizing context. I think from the school district, I would assume that for some, the response rate is much higher. But I really encourage us to just be very thorough, to reach people, try and reach people in different ways, and to really do all we can to encourage the staff to engage in this process.
I would echo that and co-sign it and amplify it and everything else I can to encourage as much. There was a conversation already that happened just around the platform, because we're trying to figure out what platform allows us to have the most mediums for outreach and supports multilingual families around translation. And so I think that is a question that I at least haven't heard the final answer to. So hopefully we're able to do that, or we may do it on a couple of platforms and then combine the data.
Super. So I think this is a good conversation, but I want to check in and see, Dr. Scallon, if you're getting from committee members what you were hoping to get. Is there, if not, please let us know. And I'm also curious about time frame for when you need to have these questions figured out. I'm not suggesting that, the committee needs to vote on the wording and, but I want to make sure that we're providing you what you need to be successful by when you need to make this happen.
So actually this feedback was helpful, sort of reinforced, I think, what the direction we were headed in. So I really appreciate that, and your perspective and encouragement. We're meeting with Attuned around the survey tomorrow. And so as a follow-up piece, I am happy to share the full survey. We didn't have it yet, but I'll share the full survey so you can get a sense of what it looks like with some changes to these questions. And then any feedback in the next week would be helpful. We are turning this all around so that it's live that first week of September. Really aiming to be able to hit our open house nights and attendees at that, as well as some of the first staff meetings. It won't be perfect because some schools have it in August and some schools have it in October. But our goal is to run it for about 3 weeks in the middle of that, and to have the data back in time to share with the community as well as the board at that October 3rd approximate board meeting.
That sounds great. Board Chair Lentz, go ahead.
I know this sounds like a record just saying all the things that we did, but I'm only highlighting the things that worked well, which is we had paper copies of translated surveys at the back to school fair because there's just so many folks there, and we already have translation and interpretation available there, and we just collected paper copies and then imported them. So if we can do that as well, that'd be awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate the idea so we don't have to repeat the same learnings. So thank you.
Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Dr. Scallon, we will be trying to reach the staff in the kitchen, in the buses and all, because in other surveys, they felt they haven't noticed them, whether they've been offered to them or not, but to really give them their 2 cents. Thanks.
Yeah, and we got to be thoughtful. I mean, we will do that outreach. I really want that feedback, and it's important feedback and provides another lens on our work. And we're just going to have to be creative about how to do that, and especially for staff that aren't typically at a computer, and how to support them in filling this out. It does make me think, and I don't know if we can pull this off, is that Dr. Warren, the new executive director, and I will be at the welcome back sessions for all of our facilities, transportation, food service staff. And so ideally we'd pull it off by then. I'm not sure that we will, but I'll at least give them the teaser that it's coming.
That's great.
And do that.
That's awesome.
So folks know to look for it and expect it, and get very excited about sharing their opinions. Yeah. Awesome. Anything else?
That's it for me.
It's 6:00.
I was gonna say, look at us. I mean,
Very good.
super. Last call for questions, comments, concerns. All right. So we are going to wrap up at 6:00 on the nose. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Really good conversation. And Dr. Skellin, again, thank you. And please pass along our gratitude to the whole team for all the hard work that went into the materials that you talked about.
Yep, they're working hard. So thank you.
Yeah. Have a good night.